if we were to use a box with a rigid body attached, it's a little too bouncy. We could make it this border. We could turn off the sprite renderer and make artificial borders and just place it where it should go. But we don't really like the bouncy. That square has a sprite renderer. It's got a box collider. It's got the rigid body to detect collisions, but I don't like the bounce. So we're going to delete the square. Instead, inside of our scripts, our player controller, we're going to use code to control how far it can go in either direction. So open your player controller script, and one thing I do want to make note of is I need to know roughly where is this on the border, right? So on the left side, if I look at my X position, that looks like about negative 1.8-ish. And I'm guessing this is roughly, oh, that's not even close. Hold on, let's oh, that's why. My background is offset. So I am going to reset position on my, there we go. So now this is negative 4.5, this is positive 4.5. Because I, on the background, reset my position so it was at exactly center of the universe, basically. And I'm guessing these are positive Y 4.5 and negative 4.5-ish. So those numbers we need to know because we are going to use those numbers to determine how far can you move. So we have our player movement. We get the input from the input manager. Remember we looked at input manager and it has the keys of A and D and the left and right arrow keys. We have move vertical, and then we put those into a vector 2 so it stores both the horizontal and the vertical. And then we said your transform, right, your physical position, we're going to translate or slide according to the input times the speed adjusted for time. Okay. Now, above this, I guess it doesn't matter if it's above or below it. I'm going to put a little comment here that says keep player within xRange, left and right sides. Now xRange is a variable we're going to declare. Notice it is lowercase and then all the words after it are capital. That is called camel case. And to do that, we need a variable called xRange. This is going to be how far can you go to the left and the right. So up here at the top, inside of the class, right where we did public float speed, we need a variable, and we could make it private, but I want to be able to edit it in Unity. So I'm going to do a public. We might need to use decimals, so instead of using int for integers, we're going to use float, which is a number with decimals. And I'm going to call this one xRange. I'll leave it at that for now. And then I need another one for y range. So if I don't set the value here, I'll have to set it in Unity. I could, if I wanted to, set it here also and be like 4.5 F for float. But I'm going to leave it unset or uninitialized. So we have x and y range as variable. So how are we going to use these? Well, let's pretend this is our box. And our player is here. That's position 0, basically, right, on the X and the Y. It's the center of the entire scene. And if you start moving this direction, because we have the player movement, if it gets to the point just past that, so let's say this is 5 on the right edge, right here, and let's say it goes to 5.1, or it tries to go to 5.1. we want it to say, hey, if you are greater than our range, go ahead and set you to the range. So if my position X is greater than my X range, which is this right edge, your position should be exactly the X range, which would put you right there. Make sense? Same thing for the up. If you try to go beyond the vertical Y range, go ahead and set you to exactly the Y range, which is this line right there. Make sense? So we're using code to say, can't go past that line. I'm going to set you to the line every frame you try to go past it. So down here, we're going to do our first if statement, which if statements are super handy because you can say if, and then in parentheses, we're going to have a condition. So if my, this will make more sense if you see this here. If my UFO, because the code we're writing is on the UFO, right? We're going to say if my transform position X, right? It's kind of like diving into from transform into position, from position into X. And the way we dive into those is with a dot. So it's if transform dot, what was the next one we need to dive into? Position dot. We're in position, we need to look at the X. If its position is greater than, now we could type a number, but if we type a number, it's hard-coded, which means we have to come back and edit the actual code to change and adjust it. We want to test if it's greater than what? Our X range. And then after that parenthesis is closed, because that's the end of the condition, we open a curly brace, and you see it automatically closes it. Just hit enter. Visual Studio does a great job of giving you place to type your code and also indenting, which is the proper way to go. Anything inside of curly braces would be indented. What should happen? Pseudocode this. If your position tries to go, remember, if your position tries to go greater than the X range, what should your position be? It should be exactly X range, right? So we need to say, if you try to go beyond the X range, haha, your transform.position. Now, interestingly, we can't say .x. We're going to say your entire transform.position is equal to, remember, a single equals sign means it's going to take whatever we put here and insert it into this. So what should your new position be? Well, remember we store these values because we're in 2D. We can store these values as vector2. Well, we're going to give it a new vector2. And then inside of the parentheses here, we need to say, what do we want its X position to be? It's going to be something like this, right? Don't type, I mean, you can type XY, but that's wrong. What do we want its X to be? If it tries to go past X range, its X should be X range, right? Don't let it go over. If it tries to go over, set it to the X range. And its Y should be, that shouldn't change, right? So we can just say its current Y. Well, how do we access its current Y? We say transform.position.y. In other words, whatever your Y was already. We got it saved, Control S. We go to Unity. Now, one thing before we test it, what is the xRange? Yeah, we haven't said it. If you expand your player controller, notice the variable shows up here. So I remember estimating something along the lines of 4.5. I'll do the same for the Y. But that's why in play mode we can actually play around with that. So I set that, make sure my script is actually turned on, that would be good. And let's hit play and see what happens. Interesting. I think my xRange is too big. So here's what you can do. In play mode, scrub this value down. Try it again. It's still too much. Scrub it down. Ooh, that looks pretty good right there. Although it shoves it off pretty hard. I think I'd go a little higher. It's still not perfect, but all right, we'll deal with it. We'll live with that. So it was like 3.8. Because of this phenomenon of it kind of pushes back, I know my border's not quite set right, but for the xRange, I'm not hitting back, it's literally shoving me backwards. We can actually, and let's do this, I'm going to take this code that we just wrote, I'm going to cut, and above my void update, I'm going to knock down a couple of lines, and I'm going to use what's called late update, which is going to run like after everything else in the frame. And if you just type in late, okay, that time, late, there you go. Once it highlights it here, you can just hit tab and it auto fills to here. And then Control V to paste. So it's not inside the update, it's inside a late update. Save it. Gotta stop this and replay it. And now it's a clean boundary, which of course I need to adjust. That looks pretty good. I wonder if I can actually... Oh yeah, look at that. So if you make this a big number and then start to scrub this down very slowly, it shoves it over. About right there, 3.45. That's what I'm going to use. Oops. 3.45. That's 0.45. Okay. We have a right side, we don't have a left side. Of course, this one would be if transform.position.x. You could copy paste the first part if you want. If it is less than, now we don't want to just say xRange because the xRange is a positive number, right? 3 point whatever. So we want the inverse of that. So we would actually compare it to the negative version of xRange. So if it's less than the negative 3.4 or whatever I said, then I'm just going to copy this for speed. Your new position should be not xRange, but negative xRange. So if you are less than, right, here's my box, here's negative xRange, here's positive xRange. If you are less than, to the left of, negative xRange, your new x position should be negative xRange. Save it, play it. There's right, there's left. Looks good.